Marcus Chen was having what he generously called one of those days, when the emergency klaxon decided to join the symphony of mechanical failures, already serenading him through the maintenance tunnels of Kepler-7. The orbital research station had been making concerning noises for the past 3 hours, sounds that fell somewhere between a dying whale and his ex-roommate's attempt at opera. "Come on, you piece of recycled space junk," he muttered, wielding his plasma torch like a conductor's baton as he tried to coax life back into the primary atmospheric recycler. The machine responded with what sounded distinctly like mechanical laughter, before belching out a cloud of purple smoke that definitely wasn't in the manual's troubleshooting section. The klaxon's wailing intensified, and Marcus's comm unit crackled to life. "Chen, we've got debris incoming from the Altair Prime system. Meteor showers gone ballistic down there. You need to." The transmission cut out as every light on the station flickered like a disco ball having an existential crisis. Marcus sighed and consulted his universal problem-solving manual, a roll of industrial-grade duct tape that had never let him down. "Right, because today needed more excitement," he said to no one in particular, since the station's AI had been giving him the silent treatment ever since he'd accidentally taught it several colorful expressions in Mandarin while fixing the garbage disposal. As he navigated through the station's corridors, which seemed to have been designed by someone who thought humans enjoyed unnecessary cardiovascular exercise, his personal scanner picked up an anomalous reading from the docking bay. The signal was weak, erratic, and had the distinctive signature of failing life support systems. Marcus broke into what he optimistically called a run, though it looked more like aggressive speed walking with intent. The docking bay's emergency lighting cast everything in an ominous red glow that would have been dramatic if it wasn't for the fact that half the bulbs were burnt out, creating a strobe effect that made him dizzy. There, tethered to the emergency docking clamp, was an escape pod that looked like it had been through a blender operated by someone with anger management issues. The hull was scarred and blackened, and one of the stabilizer fins was bent at an angle that definitely violated several laws of physics. "Well, this is either a rescue situation or the universe's idea of a practical joke," Marcus said, grabbing his emergency medical kit, a collection of bandages, pain relievers, and prayer candles that someone had optimistically labeled as comprehensive trauma care. The pod's hatch required some percussive maintenance before it agreed to open, revealing a woman who looked like she'd been having an even worse day than he was. Her clothes were torn and singed, her dark hair was matted with what he hoped was just engine coolant, and she was unconscious in that particularly concerning way that suggested serious internal injuries. What caught his attention, though, were her ears. They were longer than normal, elegantly pointed, and somehow made her unconscious face look almost ethereal despite the circumstances. "Okay, probably some kind of genetic modification," he reasoned aloud, because talking to himself had become a survival mechanism in the loneliness of space maintenance. Colony worlds are always trying new things. Last month it was gills, this month it's elf ears. Fashion's weird. He carefully extracted her from the pod, trying to remember the first aid training he'd received approximately never. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse was thready, and she had a concerning amount of blue blood seeping from various wounds. Blue blood, right, that's probably fine. Maybe she's nobility or something, he said, applying pressure bandages with the confidence of someone who had once successfully treated a paper cut. Though I'm pretty sure human blood isn't supposed to be blue regardless of social status. As he worked, jury-rigging a makeshift IV from his emergency water supply and a length of flexible conduit, the woman's eyes fluttered open. They were violet, not the kind of violet you get from colored contacts, but a deep, luminous purple that seemed to hold flecks of starlight. She looked at him with an expression of confusion mixed with what might have been gratitude, and whispered something in a language that sounded like wind chimes having a conversation with a brook. Easy there, Marcus said, checking his handiwork on the bandages. You're safe now. Well, relatively safe. This station's held together mostly by hope and spite, but the life support's working and I've got protein bars that are only slightly past their expiration date. She tried to speak again, and this time he caught what sounded like Talnath Karis Vol before she slipped back into unconsciousness. Right, definitely not standard galactic, he mused, wrapping her in his emergency thermal blanket. Note to self, learn more alien languages, or at least download a universal translator that doesn't think everything is a recipe. Marcus had spent the better part of 6 hours jury-rigging his quarters into what he generously called a medical facility, and what any actual doctor would probably classify as a war crime against the Hippocratic Oath. His mysterious patient, who he'd taken to calling Mystery Woman in his head because unconscious blue-blood elf lady was getting unwieldy, had been drifting in and out of consciousness, while he attempted to play doctor with the enthusiasm of someone who'd learned medicine from old Earth movies. Right, so according to the station's medical database, you're either suffering from severe dehydration, acute radiation poisoning, or possibly transforming into a butterfly. He informed her unconscious form while consulting his tablet. The diagnostic AI is having what I can only describe as a complete nervous breakdown. It keeps asking me to define species, and then crying. As if summoned by his complaint, the woman's eyes opened again, focusing on him with startling clarity. This time, she managed to prop herself up on one elbow, wincing as she took in her surroundings. "You are," she began in accented but clear standard galactic, her voice carrying a musical quality that made Marcus wonder if she'd been trained as a singer. "Human. Last time I checked, yeah," Marcus replied, offering her a cup of water that she accepted with hands that trembled slightly. "Though after today, I'm not ruling out the possibility that I'm actually a very confused maintenance robot having an existential crisis." She studied him with those unsettling violet eyes, as if he were a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. "Your kindness saved my life. I am called Lyrale." "Marcus Chen, station engineer and part-time miracle worker," he said, then paused. "Wait, did you just learn standard galactic while you were unconscious? Because that's either really impressive or deeply concerning." Lyrale tilted her head in a way that reminded him of a cat trying to figure out why humans insisted on walking on only 2 legs. "Your language is simple compared to High Etherian. We learn many tongues for diplomatic purposes." "Diplomatic purposes," Marcus repeated slowly. "So you're what, like an ambassador or something?" "Something like that," she said, which Marcus filed under answers that are technically true but probably hiding something important. She looked around his cramped quarters with curiosity. "This vessel is quite small. Are you the only crew member?" "Oh no, there are dozens of us scattered throughout this floating disaster," Marcus said cheerfully. "We just rarely see each other because everyone's too busy preventing various catastrophic system failures. It's like a really stressful game of hide and seek where everyone's hiding from responsibility." Lyrale attempted to stand, wobbled alarmingly, and accepted Marcus's steadying hand with what appeared to be surprise. "The third moon of Ethros was in conjunction with Velator when my ship was destroyed. The hyperspace currents became unpredictable." Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry, the what was in conjunction with the what now?" "Celestial navigation," she explained patiently, as if talking to a particularly slow child. "Surely your people understand the influence of gravitational bodies on dimensional fold travel. We understand that space is big, scary, and trying to kill us at all times," Marcus said. "Our approach to navigation is mostly point the ship away from the things that want to eat us and hope for the best. It's served us well so far." Lyrale stared at him for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been a laugh or possibly a sob. "You rescued me with no understanding of hyperspace dynamics, quantum medicine, or even basic biocompatibility protocols. Hey, I checked for allergies first, Marcus protested. Well, I checked if you were allergic to my one antihistamine. Same thing, right? You could have killed us both through cross-species contamination alone, she said, but her tone was more amazed than accusatory. But I didn't, so that's a win in my book, Marcus said with the confidence of someone who'd spent years solving problems through creative applications of duct tape and stubborn optimism. Plus, you're talking and not actively dying, which puts you ahead of the atmospheric recycler. She looked at him like he was a mathematical equation that didn't add up. Do you often rescue unknown aliens from space debris? First time, actually. Though I did once fish a very confused space pigeon out of the ventilation system. Turned out it wasn't supposed to be there, and definitely wasn't supposed to be purple. You consume heated plant extract for pleasure? She asked suddenly, staring at his half-empty coffee cup with fascination. Coffee is one of humanity's greatest achievements, Marcus said solemnly. Right up there with duct tape, and the discovery that you can fix most problems by turning something off and on again. Lyreley picked up the cup, sniffed it cautiously, and took a tiny sip. Her expression went through several rapid changes, before settling on what Marcus interpreted as politely horrified. This is bitter and hot. Why? Because life is bitter and hot, and coffee helps us cope with that existential reality, Marcus said philosophically. Plus, caffeine makes the voices in the machinery sound less judgmental. She set the cup down carefully and fixed him with that intense stare again. Marcus Chen of Earth, I find myself in your debt. Marcus was in the middle of explaining why humans put cream in coffee when every alarm on Kepler 7 decided to throw a synchronized tantrum. The lights didn't just flicker this time. They strobed like an epileptic disco, while the station's hull groaned in harmonics that suggested something very large had just arrived uninvited to their little corner of space. That's either a really aggressive meteor shower or we're about to have company, Marcus said, checking his scanner with growing concern. The good news is, my repair work on the sensor array is holding up. The bad news is, it's detecting approximately 50 ships that definitely weren't there 5 minutes ago. Lyreley went very still, her face draining of what little color it had regained. 50 ships, formation pattern. A pointy end forward, arranged in what looks like a really symmetrical flower, Marcus said, squinting at his readouts. Also, they're big, like compensating for something big. The Sovereign's Guard, she whispered, then seemed to realize she'd said something important. I mean, they appear to be diplomatic vessels. Right, and I'm the Emperor of Beetlejuice, Marcus said dryly. Lyreley, what exactly aren't you telling me? Because I'm getting the distinct impression that you're not just some random tourist who took a wrong turn at Alpha Centauri. Before she could answer, every communication device on the station crackled to life with a voice that sounded like distant thunder with delusions of grandeur. Attention, unknown vessel. You have in your possession the sovereign of the Etherian dominion. Return her immediately, or face the consequences of harboring our empress. Marcus stared at Lyreley, who was studying the deck plating with the intense focus of someone who discovered the secrets of the universe written in metal. Empress, Marcus said slowly, as in ruler of things, important things. It's more of a ceremonial title, Lyreley said weakly. And I suppose those 50 warships are just here for a ceremonial tea party. The comm system crackled again. Empress Lyreley Thranduilian, we have located your biosignature. Prepare for extraction. Thranduilian, Marcus repeated. That's quite a mouthful. Does it come with a handbook on proper pronunciation, Your Majesty? Marcus, I can explain. The explanation was interrupted by the distinctly unpleasant sensation of a transporter beam, which Marcus discovered felt exactly. Well, this is new, Marcus said, looking around at the soaring organic architecture that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. And here I thought my day couldn't get any weirder. They were surrounded by beings who looked like Lyreley's relatives. Tall, elegant, with those distinctive pointed ears and an air of sophisticated disapproval that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of his high school guidance counselor. They wore robes that shifted color as they moved, creating a rainbow effect that was either incredibly beautiful or incredibly nauseating, depending on your tolerance for motion. "Empress," said one of them, stepping forward with a bow so elaborate it probably required years of practice. "We rejoice in your safe return, and This is Marcus Chen," Lyreley said, her voice taking on an authority that made Marcus realize he'd been seriously underestimating his patient. "He saved my life." The assembled Etherians looked at Marcus like he was a particularly interesting species of bacteria. One of them consulted what appeared to be a glowing tablet made of crystallized light. According to the Sacred Codex, Article 12, Subsection 7, Paragraph. Well, it's quite lengthy, but the relevant bit is that one who saves the life of the sovereign through personal sacrifice and selfless action is bound to the crown by the debt of life bond, the official intoned. "That sounds ominous," Marcus said. "Please tell me it doesn't involve ritual sacrifice or sharing of bodily fluids." "The life bond is a sacred marriage contract," another official explained helpfully. "Congratulations, you are now the Empress's husband." Marcus blinked several times, waiting for his brain to process this information. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a translation error. Did you just say I'm married?" "The ceremony was completed the moment she accepted your aid and you freely gave it," the first official said. "It's quite romantic, really, very traditional." "I didn't freely give anything except some bandages and questionable medical advice," Marcus protested. "I didn't even know she was an empress. I thought she was just someone with really good health insurance." Lyreley stepped closer to him, and Marcus caught a whiff of something that smelled like starlight and ozone. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I should have warned you, but the bonding ritual is automatic under Etherian law. The moment you chose to save my life instead of protecting yourself, it was sealed." "So let me get this straight," Marcus said, his voice climbing toward hysteria. "I perform some basic first aid, and suddenly I'm married to an alien empress whose people apparently have the most aggressive dating customs in the galaxy." "The life bond is sacred," one of the officials said sternly. "It cannot be dissolved except by death or mutual consent after the trial of worthiness." "Trial of worthiness," Marcus repeated. "Of course there's a trial. There's always a trial." The Etherian palace was, Marcus decided, what happened when someone with unlimited resources and a serious phobia of right angles was given free rein to design architecture. Corridors curved like DNA helixes. Rooms expanded and contracted based on some mysterious algorithm, and every door seemed to have a personal vendetta against him specifically. "The guest quarters will adjust to your biorhythms within a few rotations," Lyreley explained as Marcus stood in what he assumed was his bedroom, watching furniture literally grow out of the floor. "Try not to fight the process." "Right, because nothing says welcome to the family like sentient furniture that might decide to digest me in my sleep," Marcus said, poking experimentally at a chair that purred when touched. "Does everything here have to be alive? What's wrong with good old-fashioned dead matter?" "Dead matter lacks harmony with the living essence of the palace," she said, as if this explained everything rather than raising 17 new questions. "The crystalline matrix responds to emotional resonance and I'm going to stop you right there," Marcus interrupted, "because I'm pretty sure my emotional resonance right now is mostly panic with undertones of profound confusion, and I don't want to accidentally turn my bedroom into a therapy couch." The past 3 days had been what Marcus generously called educational, and what anyone with functioning survival instincts would call a prolonged exercise in cultural misunderstanding. He'd already committed what he'd been told were minor diplomatic incidents, including suggesting that the sacred reflection pools might benefit from a good cleaning, asking why the throne room didn't have any actual chairs, and expressing genuine concern about the structural integrity of buildings that seem to be held together by positive thinking. "The Council of Noble Houses has requested an audience," Lyreley said, her tone suggesting this was about as welcome as a tax audit. "They wish to evaluate your suitability as imperial consort." "Let me guess. This involves more trials, more ancient customs, and probably something that could get me accidentally executed if I use the wrong fork," Marcus said. "There are no forks in the evaluation process," she said seriously. "That was a metaphor, but thank you for that terrifying clarification." The council chamber was a soaring space filled with what Marcus had learned to recognize as important Etherians, beings who wore their authority like expensive cologne, and seemed physically incapable of speaking without at least 3 subordinate clauses. They sat on what might have been chairs or possibly trained animals. Marcus had learned not to ask. "Lord Valandrel Moonwhisper of the Eastern Reaches," announced someone whose job title appeared to be Professional Name Shouter. "Duke Thessarian Starweave of the Crystal Valleys, Lady." "Are we really doing all the names?" Marcus whispered to Lyreley. "Because I'm pretty sure I'm going to forget them anyway, and this feels like it could take hours." "It's traditional," she whispered back. "So is human sacrifice in some cultures, but you don't see me volunteering for that either." Lord Valandrel, or possibly Duke Thessarian, Marcus had already lost track, stood with the fluid grace of someone who'd never stubbed a toe in his life. Marcus Chen of Earth, the Council questions whether a being of such limited cultural sophistication can adequately serve as imperial consort. "Limited cultural sophistication," Marcus repeated. "I'll have you know that human culture gave the galaxy duct tape, pizza, and the revolutionary concept that you can fix most problems by hitting them with a wrench. That's a pretty impressive legacy right there. The sacred gardens of eternity have remained unchanged for 3 millennia," another council member intoned. "Their crystalline matrix channels the pure essence of—" "They're dying," Marcus interrupted, causing what he was pretty sure was a collective gasp of horror. "The drainage system is completely shot. Half the crystals are clouded because of mineral buildup, and don't get me started on the pH levels of that reflection pool." The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for natural disasters or really spectacular social blunders. "You dare suggest that our most sacred site requires maintenance?" Lord Valandrel sputtered. "I'm suggesting that even sacred sites need basic upkeep if you want them to keep being sacred instead of turning into expensive swamps," Marcus said. "Look, I spent 6 hours yesterday just watching water pool in places it shouldn't pool. That's not mystical essence, that's poor engineering." Lady somebody or other leaned forward, her expression suggesting Marcus had just announced his intention to redecorate with finger paints. "The sacred gardens are tended by the Order of Eternal Cultivation, who have maintained them according to ancient traditions." "Ancient traditions that apparently don't include functional plumbing," Marcus said. "Has anyone actually asked the crystals what they want? Because from where I'm standing, they're basically screaming for better water circulation." "The crystals cannot speak," Duke Thessarian said with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a particularly slow child. "Not with words, no, but they're definitely communicating through mineral deposits, structural stress patterns, and what I'm pretty sure is the crystal equivalent of a cry for help," Marcus replied. "Give me a day and some basic tools, and I'll show you what I mean." The council exchanged looks that spoke volumes about their opinion of humans who thought they could improve on 3,000 years of tradition. "Very well," Lord Valandrel said with the tone of someone agreeing to watch a particularly boring execution. "You may attempt your modifications, but know that any damage to the sacred gardens will result in immediate exile and dissolution of your bond with the Empress." "No pressure then," Marcus muttered. Marcus stood knee-deep in sacred crystal garden muck at precisely the moment the universe decided to test his new marriage with what military strategists would politely call an existential threat to all sentient life in the sector. The emergency klaxons, apparently a universal constant regardless of species, were wailing across the Etherian homeworld while he tried to explain to a very stressed empress why he just violated 3,000 years of religious tradition with a drainage pipe and some strategically placed pumps. The Zephyrian Collective has broken through our outer defenses, Lyrale announced, her voice carrying the kind of controlled panic that suggested she was mentally calculating how many different ways this day could get worse. They're demanding our surrender in exchange for sparing the colony worlds. Right, so Tuesday then, Marcus said, wiping crystalline mud off his hands. Are the Zephyrians the tentacly ones or the ones that look like angry geometric shapes? Angry geometric shapes, she confirmed. And they've somehow developed a weapon that destabilizes hyperspace itself. Our entire fleet is trapped in normal space. Marcus looked down at the sacred gardens, which were now flowing with clean water for the first time in centuries, the crystals humming with what even the most tradition-bound council members had to admit was considerably more enthusiasm than usual. You know, it's funny, he said thoughtfully. Hyperspace destabilization usually involves resonance cascade failures, and these crystals. He gestured at the now gleaming formations around them. They're natural hyperspace resonators, aren't they? The sacred gardens are said to channel the fundamental harmonies of creation itself, Lyrale said, then paused. Marcus, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that sometimes the solution to a really complicated problem is embarrassingly simple, he said, pulling out his scanner and getting readings that made him grin like someone who just discovered the universe's best-kept secret. And I'm also thinking that your ancestors weren't just being mystical when they called these gardens sacred. They were being practical. 2 hours later, Marcus found himself standing before the combined Etherian High Command, the Council of Noble Houses, and what appeared to be every military officer in the Dominion, trying to explain quantum mechanics using hand gestures and increasingly desperate analogies. So the Zephyrian's weapon works by creating destructive interference patterns in hyperspace, he said, drawing diagrams in the air that probably looked like interpretive dance to anyone not fluent in advanced physics. But interference patterns can be canceled out by creating opposite waves, constructive interference. And you propose to do this how, exactly? Admiral Starweave asked with the tone of someone humoring a potentially dangerous lunatic. With the biggest hyperspace resonator array in the known galaxy, Marcus said, pointing toward the palace's crystal spires. The entire city is basically one massive quantum tuning fork. You just never thought to use it that way. Lord Valandrel looked like he was developing a migraine. You want to turn our capital city into a weapon. I want to turn your capital city into the galaxy's most impressive noise-canceling headphones, Marcus corrected. We sync the crystal matrix to generate counterharmonics to their destabilization field, and their weapon becomes about as useful as a chocolate teapot. The plan, Marcus reflected later, was either brilliant or the kind of spectacularly bad idea that would be studied by military historians for centuries. Possibly both. Coordinating the resonance patterns of an entire crystal city while under attack turned out to be like trying to tune a cosmic piano while someone threw meteors at it. The Etherian technicians worked with desperate efficiency, following Marcus's increasingly frantic calculations as Zephyrian ships poured destructive energy into local space. Resonance cascade is building, Lyrale reported from the control center they'd hastily established in the palace's heart. But the harmonic alignment is still 7 degrees off optimal. 7 degrees, Marcus muttered, running calculations in his head while trying to ignore the way the palace walls were vibrating like a struck bell. The throne room crystals. They're the primary resonance focus, but they're not aligned with the others. He sprinted through corridors that were now actively reshaping themselves as the city's crystal matrix reached unprecedented energy levels. reaching the throne room just as the Zephyrian weapon fired its final, devastating pulse. Marcus dove for the central crystal formation, physically pushing the massive structures into alignment while hyperspace itself seemed to scream around them. For a moment that felt like eternity, reality held its breath. Then the counterwave hit. The Zephyrian weapon didn't just shut down, it inverted, sending a pulse of stabilizing energy through local hyperspace that left their entire fleet stranded in normal space, helpless against the suddenly mobile Etherian defense forces. "Well," Marcus said, sitting in the Crystal Gardens that evening, while Lyreley tended to his various cuts and bruises with medical technology that made his duct tape first aid look like cave paintings. "That was educational." "The council has voted," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "You've been formally recognized as imperial consort with all rights and privileges thereof. And the responsibilities. Mostly preventing me from starting wars through diplomatic incidents and keeping the palace's infrastructure from falling apart," she said, then smiled. "I believe these are tasks well suited to your particular talents." Marcus looked around at the gardens, where the crystals were singing their strange harmonies under an alien sky, and realized